book of Judges is what we cover today, the dark ages of Israel. We just got done with the book of Joshua, and we saw a few downsides, a few slip-ups, and a couple oopsies in there. But for the most part, it was a really positive book. Lots of victories, lots of obedience, lots of success under the campaigns of Joshua. We took down Jericho, and we brought in Rahab, and Ai was kind of an oopsie. But we ended up taking that eventually, and a whole bunch of other campaigns and victories and successes. And the more they followed God, the more they obeyed Him, the better things went for them. And every now and then, like I said, they'd kind of mess up and have a disobedience here and there. But overall, it's a super solid, really positive book. And after a book like that, you almost hate to get into a book like this. And yet, here it is. It's the book following the book of Joshua, and it is Judges. The dark ages of Israel. But as difficult and ugly as this book can be, I do promise you there will be a bright spot at the end of the book. So if you get halfway through the book and say, I can't take this anymore, keep on going, and we will get to the bright spot at the end. I promise you. Okay? The author of the book of Judges, we put Samuel up there with a couple question marks. The Bible doesn't really claim who the author is. Jewish tradition places it with Samuel, and some of the wording in there makes it sound like it was written probably during the reign of when the kings would have been, probably either Saul or maybe David, because it refers back when there was no king in Israel, as if in the current time when it was being written there was a king. Some of the other city references and stuff like that make it sound like it was probably before Solomon. So probably somewhere in the Saul to David range is probably when it was written. And again, our best guess is Samuel, and Jewish tradition says it was Samuel, and that's the best guess we've got. So we're going to put Samuel there with a couple question marks. The readers, of course, would have been Israel early in the king's time, probably explaining their past and pointing out their past mistakes so that they don't repeat them is probably the point of the book. The message is that with no leadership after Joshua, Israel rejects the covenant with their Yahweh, with their king, their God, because there was no king in Israel. And if you look at Judges chapter 1, verse 1, it starts out after the death of Joshua, which is interesting. If you want to, you don't have to, but flip back just a few pages to Joshua chapter 1, verse 1, says, after the death of Moses. That's how Joshua starts out. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, and then he gives him his instructions. The book of Judges says, after the death of Joshua. But there it doesn't say God spoke to his leader person. It says the people of Israel inquired of the Lord, which is a good move. But you notice in Joshua, God has a leader pre-designated and picked out, says, you're the next guy, I will work through you and you will lead my people. Here is just strictly between God and the people. There is no intermediary leadership really set up at this time. We kind of talked about that at the end of the book of Joshua. Joshua died, the leaders died, all of the spiritual leaders died, and there was really no designated replacement set up. And that proves problematic throughout this book. And so with no leadership set up after Joshua, Israel rejects the covenant with God because there was no king in Israel. And those are in quotes. You will see that quote come up later on in the book. The structure looks kind of like this. Israel's initial disobedience to God's commands. We'll take a look at that. Then the center section. This is what Judges is most well known for. All the crazy and fantastical stories of the different judges that came and went. God's judgments and deliverance for his people. And then finally, at the end of the book, Israel's depravity after its disobedience is what finishes up the book. The first part of the book is, well, it picks up right exactly where we left off. In fact, it looks to me like it was very, very intentionally picking up at the end of the book of Joshua, because several verses are taken straight from Joshua and inserted into this book. In fact, verses 11 through 15 of chapter 1. Chapter 1 starts out talking about the tribe of Judah, and they are designated to be the first attackers after the death of Joshua. So the people go to God and they say, who should attack? Who should lead? Who should do the first thing? God says, tribe of Judah, they should go and attack and have given their lands into their hands. And so they start another military campaign, and they attack and they conquer and they have success. And we say, good, excellent, fantastic. Joshua's gone, but God's still with the people. We can pick up right with the victories where we left off in Joshua. The men fought. In verse 11, we see from there they went against the inhabitants of Debir. The name of Debir was formerly Kiriath Sepher. And Caleb said, he who attacks Kiriath Sepher and captures it, I will give him Ashah, my daughter, for his wife. And Othniel, the son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother, captured it, and he gave him his daughter for a wife. Remember this whole story from back in Joshua. It's taken directly from Joshua. So Caleb, which was one of the leaders of Israel in Joshua's day, he says, I'm going to go attack that mountain with all the giants on it. Remember, I'm 85 years old, and I'm just as strong as I ever was. And he goes hiking up that hill with his walking stick and starts slashing and whacking, and those giants are falling left and right, and it's a great story. And he says, there's another city over there. I need somebody to attack it. And whoever attacks it and takes it, I will give him my daughter. And sure enough, his nephew raises his hand and says, I'll do it. I'll go whack down those giants. And so he goes over and starts whacking the giants, and he takes the town, and the marriage happens, and it's a great story. And that's taken right from Joshua. He continues on there, and we get to verse, where we want to start here. 16, the descendants of Kenite, Moses' father-in-law, went up with the people, which lies wherever it is. Verse 17, Judah went with Simeon his brother, and they defeated the Canaanites. So the name of the city was called Hormah. Verse 18, Judah also captured Gaza with its territory, and Ashkelon with its territory, and Ekron with its territory. More victories, more success, more obedience. It's great, great, great. And we get to verse 19. Verse 19, and we see, and the Lord was with Judah, and he took possession of the hill country. Great, that's fantastic. But he could not drive out the inhabitants of the plain because they had chariots of iron. Ooh, that's a problem. And you kind of remember this from the Joshua 2. Remember last week we kind of extrapolated and kind of combined some of these negative verses where there were defeats, but every here and there was kind of a pocket of resistance where they just couldn't quite seem to drive them out. So the end of verse 9, and that's kind of what the writer of Judges here, Samuel probably, does. He takes all these, can we call them failures? Maybe incompletions. Maybe we'll call them that for now. And he brings them all together in one place so we can see them, kind of what we did last week in Joshua. So Judah went and they took possession of the hill country, but they couldn't drive out the inhabitants of the plains because they had iron chariots. Clearly, God hadn't planned for iron chariots. This was unexpected to God. It took him by surprise, and he wasn't equipped to deal with iron chariots. I hope you're good. I see some people going, nah, that's silly. You're right, that's silly. And when you say it like that, it sounds ridiculous, because it is. But the people apparently were intimidated by the iron chariots, and they didn't trust, and they didn't attack the way they should have, and they left the job incomplete. So the Lord was with Judah, but they couldn't take the plains, or maybe we should say they wouldn't take the plains because their excuse was the iron chariots. Verse 20, Hebron was given to Caleb, as Moses had said, and he drove out from it the three sons of Anak. We talked about that last week. Verse 21, but the people of Benjamin did not drive out the Jebusites who lived in Jerusalem, so that the Jebusites have lived with the people of Benjamin in Jerusalem to this day. They took Jerusalem. In fact, verse 7 of chapter 1 talks about Judah attacking Jerusalem and taking it. But when they attacked it, they didn't kill all the people, and they didn't drive them out, and they left them there. Why would they do that? I don't know. It doesn't say, other than probably complacency. Maybe they didn't care enough. Maybe they were lazy. Whatever the reasoning, it really doesn't matter. The point is that they didn't do the job that God gave them to do, and they left it undone. They disobeyed. Verse 22 continues on. The house of Joseph also went up against Bethel, and the Lord was with them. And the house of Joseph scouted out Bethel. Now the name was formerly Luz. And the spies saw men coming from the city and said, please show us the way into your city, and we'll deal kindly with you. And they showed him the way into the city. He was another traitor. And they struck the city with the edge of the sword, but they let the man and all of his family go, kind of like what they'd done for Rahab earlier. And the man went to the land of the Hittites, and he built another city called Luz. And that's all fantastic, and they had another victory. But then we get to verse 27. But Manasseh did not drive out the inhabitants of Bethshan and its villages, or Tanakh and its villages, or the inhabitants of Dor and its villages, or the inhabitants of Ibleam and its villages, or the inhabitants of Megiddo and its villages, for the Canaanites persisted in dwelling in that land. I'll bet they did. Not too many people volunteer and say, yes, I'd like to be exterminated. Please drive me out of my home. I imagine they tried to persist, just like all the others that they killed and captured. I'm sure probably tried to persist. But they didn't finish the job. They did not drive out the inhabitants of the land. Now, verse 28, when Israel grew strong, they put the Canaanites to forced labor, but they did not drive them out completely. Well, forced labor is kind of okay, right? They captured them. It's halfway done, maybe. except for, remember what God said about the Canaanites and all the people in the land? Do not what? Do not make a treaty with them. Take no prisoners. Kill them all. Do not allow them to live. Don't live among them. Kill them all. This is my judgment on them. I'm giving the land to you. No treaties. Period. Done. And so they made a treaty. We'll let you live if you become our slaves. So that's what they did. We continue on, and while so far you can see up on the screen, we kind of sprinkle in successes with the failures. Success, failure, success, failure. The list continues, but the successes kind of dwindle out, but the failures continue. Verse 29, Ephraim did not drive out the Canaanites who lived in Gezer, so the Canaanites lived in Gezer among them. Verse 30, Zebulun did not drive out the inhabitants of Kitron, nor the inhabitants of Nahal, so the Canaanites lived among them, but became subject to forced labor. Verse 31, Asher did not drive out the inhabitants of Arco, or the inhabitants of Sidon, or of Ahlab, or of all those other cities there. So the Asherites lived among the Canaanites, the inhabitants of the land, for they did not drive them out. We continue on. Naphtali did not drive out the inhabitants. Verse 34, the Amorites pressed the people of Dan back into the hill country, for they did not allow them to come down into the plain. The Amorites persisted in dwelling in the mountains, and it talks about the lands and stuff there. Joseph rested heavily on them, and they became subject to forced labor, more slavery. And the border of the Amorites ran up from the ascent of Akrabim and stuff that it says there at the end of the verse. Failure, didn't complete, lived among them, forced labor, negotiations, treaties, compromise, lack of follow-through, lack of obedience, over and over and over. And these sound kind of on the surface like maybe they're small and minor disobediences, and I don't know, I guess in kind of some respects they are, but the consequences for it later on are catastrophic, as we will see throughout the book. By the way, just as a side fun fact here, you see all these different verses here where it says the Canaanites, they were subject to forced labor. Canaanites subject to forced labor. Canaanites subject to forced labor. I don't know if it sounds familiar to any of you, but a long, long, long time ago in the story of Noah in Genesis, we see this verse, didn't we? And he, Noah, said, Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants they shall be unto his brethren. For the sin of Ham, his father, he came in and looked at Noah in an unpleasant situation. And he pronounces a curse, not on Ham the father, but on Canaan the son. And you say, why did he curse the son? Why did he condemn the son to be a servant instead of the father? Well, it's because the son's descendants, specifically, who would become the slave laborers of his brethren, Israel. And here's the fulfillment of that verse right here. But what sounds like, in Noah's day, it sounds like a victory for the other brothers and a defeat for Canaan. Right now, it's almost in a weird way kind of a success for Canaan, right? Wasn't it? Because while they are slave laborers, they shouldn't have been slave laborers, should they? They should have been what? Dead. Yeah, so I guess slave labor is a step up from dead, I suppose. And so Canaan's curse comes to a fulfillment right here. And yet in a weird, kind of sick, unfortunate way, it's actually a success for Canaan because it kind of saved his life. But now he's forced labor in and among the people of Israel. So I thought that was a fascinating factoid for you all. And so God looks at all of this lack of completion and this disobedience. And in chapter 2, he makes a pronouncement. He says, chapter 2, verse 1, Now the angel of the Lord went up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up from Egypt and brought you into the land that I swore to give to your fathers. I said, I will never break my covenant with you, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land, and you shall break down their altars. But you have not obeyed my voice. What is this you have done? So now I say, I will not drive them out before you, but they shall become thorns in your sides, and their God shall be a snare to you. And the people, they were upset, and they cried, and I won't say repented, that's too strong of a word, because we see in future chapters they didn't repent at all, but they were sad about this, and they made an altar, and they tried to worship, but God said, you have disobeyed. You haven't done what I've told you to do. Moses sang about this. You remember the song he wrote at the end of Deuteronomy before you went into the land, and they sang a song. It was a top 10 chart hit for years and years. Remember we talked about this? But the whole song was about how they would get into the land and they'd disobey and they'd turn away from God and they'd follow the idols. And Joshua, in his departing speech at the end of the book last week, he made a great grand speech. He said, you people, I know you. You will not obey. You will not follow God. You will not keep his commandments. I know you better this. And the people responded by saying, There's a great big pep rally. Remember, the people said, "We will serve the Lord." Joshua says, "No, I know you won't. You're stubborn, you're stiff-necked, you're rebellious people. You will not do it." "We will serve the Lord." "No, you won't. You turn away too fast. You disregard God's command." "We will serve the Lord." Remember the big pep rally and how short-lived it is, because here it doesn't take but chapter 1 and the first part of chapter 2, and already they've done what? They've disobeyed already, and they've set themselves in a trap. It's horrible. He continues in chapter 2, verse 6. Now this is kind of flashback. It's reminding us of what Joshua has done here. "When Joshua dismissed the people of Israel, each went to his inheritance to take possession of the land. And the people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, and all the days of the elders who outlived Joshua, who had seen all the great works that the Lord had done for Israel." Does this verse sound familiar, by the way? Chapter 2, verse 6 is taken directly from, anybody know? If you can read, you know. Joshua chapter 24, verse 28. Yes, absolutely. Verse 7 is taken directly from Joshua 24, verse 31. Continuing to verse 8. "Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110 years. And they buried him within the boundaries of his inheritance in that place, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of the mountain of Gash." And verses 8 and 9, again, come directly from Joshua 24, verses 29 and 30. But here in Judges, it adds one more verse on top of that, doesn't it? Verse 10, where it says, "And all that generation were also gathered to their fathers," all the people that had visually seen and experienced God's miraculous deliverance and victories throughout the book of Joshua, "they all died. And there arose another generation after them, who did not know the Lord or the work that he had done for Israel." Now, it says they did not know, and to us, here in our day, it sounds like they're ignorant of. They've never heard of it before. Well, I guarantee they've heard of it before. By did not know, it means what? Did not follow, did not experience firsthand. They didn't see it with their own eyes, and therefore it wasn't meaningful to them, and therefore they didn't follow in the same ways. They decided to go their own way. That was Dad's battle. They did all kinds of fun stuff back then, but look at all the fun stuff we get to do now. Look at all the idolatry. Look at all the excitement. Look at all the pagans around us that we can integrate with. And chapter 2, verse 10 is a super, super sad verse. Yeah. He continues in verse 11, "The people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and they served the Baals. And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the peoples who were around them. They bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger. And they abandoned the Lord, and they served the Baals and the Ashtoreth. So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he gave them over to plunderers, who plundered them. And he sold them into the hand of their surrounding enemies, so they could no longer withstand their enemies. And whenever they marched out, the hand of the Lord was against them for harm, as the Lord had warned, and the Lord had sworn to them, and they were in terrible distress." If you wanted to summarize the book, there it is, that passage right there. That's what happened. They disobeyed. God no longer fought for them, just like he said back in Deuteronomy 28. Remember, if you disobey, I will be against you. That's exactly what happened. Because of that, the people were defeated. They were overrun. They were oppressed, and it was a bad time for them. Very, very bad. So, here's the solution in verse 16. "So the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them. Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after other gods and bowed down to them, and soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers walked, who had obeyed the command of the Lord, and they did not do so." So we start to set up a cycle here, and he's kind of describing how the rest of this book is going to work. And it looks like this. You start out with rebellion, and we saw that in verses 11 through 13. The people turned away from God to their idolatry, and they turned to wickedness and all kinds of immorality, and they rebel against God. God then would send in judgment and oppression from the surrounding nations. And I say surrounding, but it's really not surrounding, is that the people that lived within them, who God no longer gave victory to Israel, he gave victory to the enemies. They get stronger. Israel gets weaker. Now the people that they left to live among them overpower them, and they start to oppress them. The people who are not even supposed to be alive in chapter 1 to oppress them now become their oppressors. Well, God has pity and compassion on them. Talks about that in the last half of verse 18. Skip down to that, where it says, "For the Lord was moved to pity by their groaning because of those who afflicted and oppressed them. God looked down and saw his people, saw their misery, And even though they had been rebellious, he has compassion and mercy on them. And so he, verse 16, brings up a judge. The Lord raises up judges who save them out of the hand of those who plundered them. And yet, verse 17, they did not listen to their judges, for they whored after the other gods and bowed down to them. They soon turned aside from the way in which their fathers had walked, who had obeyed the commandments of the Lord, and they did not do so. Whenever the Lord raised up judges for them, the Lord was with the judge, and he saved them from the hand of all their enemies during the days of the judge. For the Lord was moved by pity and groaning because of their oppression. So you can see this cycle setting up here. There's rebellion, there's judgment and oppression. God brings the people in. God has pity and compassion on them when they cry out to him. And I'm trying not to use the word repent, because I really don't think it was genuine repentance, because as soon as the judge saves them out of the enemy's hand, what happens? They go right back. So it's not really repentance. It's more of, I'm miserable, please come and save me. Kind of a superficial, I'm sorry for what I've done, I'll stop. But as soon as the deliverance comes, they go right back. So I'm really trying not to call it genuine repentance. And after their repentance, God brings in a deliverer, and he grants them freedom. That liberates them. And now they have an opportunity to do what? To go right back into their rebellion and their disobedience. So it's a vicious cycle all the way through the book that we see. But if that's not bad enough, it gets even worse. Look at the very next verse, verse 19. Verse 19 says this, "But whenever the judge that God had raised up died, they turned back and were even more corrupt than their fathers, going after other gods and serving them and bowing down to them. They did not drop any of their practices or their stubborn ways." So they would experience oppression. They'd say, "Oh, help me, save me, God, we're turning back to you." So God would save them, and they would turn back to the rebellion. But not only did they turn back to the rebellion they had before, they would what? They'd dig in even deeper. They'd get even worse. So every cycle is not even just a static cycle going around and around and around. It looks almost more like this, doesn't it? More of a spiral heading downwards. And every time they do the loop-de-loop, they find they're a story deeper and a story lower and a story worse, a level down all the way throughout the book. So we can probably kind of graph the book out just like this, where you start out with the quote-unquote minor sins in the first couple chapters. The minor sin is they didn't quite complete the job that God gave them to do in driving out the people. That leads into the downward spiral of chapters 3 through 16. Those are the stories of the judges that this book is so well known for. And the book ends then with another kind of a State of the Union story, doesn't it? A State of the Union speech or illustration to show exactly where the country has come from chapter 1 all the way down to the end of the book. And it's not a pretty picture, and we'll cover that later. Chapter 2 continues, in chapter 3. It talks about how God did not drive out the rest of the nations just like he said, because they refused to complete the job the first time. They said, "We want to leave these people." So God says, "Fine, leave the people. They will destroy you." And sure enough, they did. It talks about how they left them. The people were still there. They were there to test Israel to see if they would obey. Obviously, we know they did not. Verse 5, "So the people lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites," all these people. "And their daughters they took to themselves for wives, and their own daughters they gave to their sons, and they served their gods." They did exactly what God told them not to do. They let them live. They were a snare. They started to intermarry and mix and mingle with the people, and sure enough, they were drawn into idolatry. And that brings us to verse 7 of chapter 3, which is our first judge. The first judge, God gives us the basic kind of outline of what a judge's tenure will look like. Doesn't give us a ton of example, but enough to kind of get the idea of what we're to see through the rest of the book. Othniel, verse 7, "And the people of Israel did what was evil in the sight of the Lord." There's a phrase we're going to see all too often. "They forgot the Lord their God and served the Baals and the Ashtoreth. Therefore the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he sold them into the hand of that guy, king of Mesopotamia. And the people of Israel served him for 8 years. But when the people of Israel cried out to the Lord raised up a deliverer for the people of Israel, who saved them, Othniel, son of Kenaz, Caleb's younger brother." First of all, did you already see the pattern that we talked about starting to form? It talks about it. You got the rebellion. You got the judgment. God has pity. He brings in the judge. We just read that right there. So there's the cycle. Everybody recognized Othniel. We just talked about him a few minutes ago. Good guy. Caleb's younger brother. Caleb's younger, yes. Anyway, Caleb's family, whatever he is. My mind just went blank. Nephew, son, brother, son-in-law, whatever it was. Just kidding. Yes, anyway. But Caleb's family, good family, followers of God, leaders in Israel. And so he's the one who went up and said, yeah, I'll attack the city if I get to marry my cousin. And so he went up and he attacks the city, good guy, and so he leads Israel. Yes, Caleb's younger brother, right there it is, if I just read. Verse 10, the Spirit of the Lord was upon him, and he judged Israel. And by the way, when you talk about judge, I know we in our culture think about judge like the guy with the black robe. He sits at the bench and pounds the gavel and stuff. Maybe there was some of that, but this was just the leader. They didn't have a king proper, and so this would have been kind of a general leader, probably not just in legal disputes, where the two lawyers come and argue their case, but he would have been kind of I don't want to say guru either, but kind of the reference guy to go to if you have a question or want direction. He was kind of the example for the nation. Also, just another small fact, probably a lot of these judges we talk about was not over the entire nation of Israel. Israel is kind of a loose confederation at this point. You had the different tribes and stuff. And probably some, if not all of these judges would have been kind of localized, maybe having influence over 2 or 3 or 4 of the tribes, but maybe not all of them. So just so you kind of have a picture of what the judge is in your mind. Anyway, the Spirit of the Lord was with him, verse 10, and he judged Israel. He went out to war, and the Lord gave this guy, king of Mesopotamia, into his hand, and his hand prevailed over him. So the land had rest for 40 years. Then Othniel, the son of Kenaz, died. So he delivered them from Mesopotamia. God granted them peace for 40 years while Othniel was alive. And then we get to verse 12, don't we? What does verse 12 say? And the people of Israel again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord. Oh, again. And every judge we see, we're going to see the story of the judge, and we're going to find the same verse haunting us over again. So they were delivered, they turned back, they did more evil. Now, as we go through these stories of the judges, I want you to mentally kind of keep track of a couple things. First of all, keep track of the religious status of the nation, the spiritual status. How are they following God? Also keep track of the, of the moral status of the nation. See what happens as we progress throughout the book, or digress throughout the book, maybe I should say. Finally, keep track of the social situation. How is society doing as a country? How are they functioning as a society? And you can see all of these start to degrade. Put yourselves in the shoes of the people living at the time. Now, if you lived during the time of Othniel, how would you be? You'd have been starting to turn to idolatry. God is clearly not happy, but society overall is not doing too super horribly, maybe. I mean, we're still kind of hanging in there. We're doing all right. Things have not degraded completely, but I think we'll see that start to change. See what you think of each story of the judges as we go through, as the stories seem to get a little bit grittier and a little bit nastier and a little bit uglier every time we do the cycle, every time we spin around another circle of the spiral as we head downwards. The next judge we have is Ehud. Ehud is an interesting character. Verse 12, the people did Israel on the side of the Lord, and so the Lord strengthened Eglon, king of Moab, against Israel, because they had done what was evil in the sight of the Lord again. He gathered together himself the Ammonites and the Amalekites, and they went and they defeated Israel. They took possession of the city of the palms. They served him for 18 years. The people of Israel cried out to the Lord, and the Lord raised up for them a deliverer, Ehud, a son of Gera, a Benjamite, a left-handed man. The people of Israel sent tribute to him, to Eglon, the king of Moab. Ehud made for himself a sword with 2 edges, a cubit in length, 1.5 feet, 18 inches, and he bound it on his right thigh under his clothes. And he presented the tribute to the king of Moab. He was a very fat man. Interesting, the Bible takes the time to point out that he was very fat. Kind of makes you wonder, why do I care if he's fat? In fact, later on you'll see the fat coming into play a little bit as I won't spoil the story for you. But he's a very fat guy. Why? I don't know if the Bible put that in there to contrast it with the Israelites, who are probably kind of starving at this point because The oppressors were stealing all their food. That's typically what the oppressors would do. They come in, they raid the crops around harvest time, take all the food for themselves. That means the Israelites have no food, therefore they are starving. There were not many fat Israelites at this point. And it's unfortunate because remember all the blessing that God promised in chapter 28 of Deuteronomy. If you obey, I'll bless you. Your crops will do great. You'll have more than enough to eat. You won't have place enough to store all the food. And that's not what the Israelites are experiencing because they disobeyed. So they're very, very skinny Israelites. The only one who is fat and well-fed is who? The oppressor. Yeah, the oppressor. It wasn't supposed to be the oppressor. The oppressor was supposed to be dead. Yes, they were supposed to have defeated him decades ago and killed all of his ancestors. But here he is. And so now he's oppressing them, and he's the one who's well-fed and fat, not the Israelites. Verse 18, when he had finished presenting the tribute, he sent away the people who carried the tribute, but he himself turned back at the idols near Gilgal and said, I have a secret message for you, O king. And he commanded, silence. And all of his attendants went out from his presence. And Ehud came to him as he was sitting alone in his cool roof luxury penthouse chamber with an attached bathroom. And Ehud said, I have a message from God for you. And he arose from his seat, and Ehud reached with his left hand, and he took the sword from his right thigh and thrust it into his belly. And the hilt went in after the blade, and the fat closed in over the blade. The guy was so obese. The blade went in, and the handle just followed right into the incision, and fat just closed in over the handle. And Ehud took out his hand, and it was all kind of slimy. He had to find a washcloth to wash off his hand because it was gross. But the entire dagger, 18 inches plus a handle, went into this guy, and his body just absorbed it. Think like Jabba the Hutt guy, right? You know, Star Wars, big fat ugly. Anyway, I digress, but not really, because that's what it says. Verse 22, the hilt went in after the blade, and the fat closed over the blade, for he did not pull the sword out of his belly, and the dung came out. Ooh, nice shot. Then Ehud went out into the porch and closed the doors of the roof chamber behind him and locked him. Now when he had gone, verse 24, the servants came, and when they saw that the doors of the roof chamber were locked, they thought, surely he's relieving himself in the closet of the cool chamber. He's taking a potty break for a minute. Yeah, so we'll let him be. I mean, he is, well, anyway. And they waited there till they were embarrassed. We got to change this guy's diet up a little bit. He's getting fat, and it's taking him a long time on the you-know-what. But when he still did not open the door of the roof chamber, they took the key and opened them, and there lay their Lord dead on the floor. Ehud escaped while they delayed, and they passed beyond the idols and escaped to Seirah. And when he arrived, he sounded the trumpets, he rallied his people, and they went and attacked, and they were able to drive out the bad guys. What do you think of Ehud, the left-handed leader who killed the fat Moabite king on a rooftop bathroom? He delivered the people from Moab, and they had peace, it says, for 80 years. That's quite a while. After him was Shamgar. The Bible doesn't tell us much about Shamgar. After him was Shamgar, the son of Anath, who killed 600 of the Philistines with an ox goad. He also saved Israel. That's all we know about him. I didn't even include him in the slideshow. But I'll bet there's a fun story there. I'll bet there is. The guy killed 600 Philistines with a pointy thing that's used to prod the oxen along. Almost sounds like a Samson kind of guy, doesn't he? But we don't know. We don't know. Why doesn't the Bible tell us about this guy? Because for some reason, God didn't need him to prove the point that he was trying to prove. Remember, this is not about storybook time, or it's not about history lesson time. It's about God teaching us a story, teaching us a lesson that he wants us to see. And so he tells the stories that promote his story, and he leaves out the ones that do not. And for whatever reason, Shamgar's story is not that relevant. So he mentioned them and moved on. That unfortunately brings us to chapter 4, verse 1. And the people of Israel again did what? Did what was evil in the sight of the Lord after Ehud died. Strap in, here we go again. Now, what do you think of the story of Ehud? How does that make you feel? How would you like to live in the time of Ehud? Kind of a grisly story, a little bit violent, a little bit gross. Maybe, I don't know. Not, battles are always gross, and I understand this, and it's not great. But kind of a, story. Let's continue and see what else we can see. Deborah and Barak. I will not take the time to read this whole thing to you. But long story short, Barak, who God called to lead the people, God spoke to Deborah. another side thing here, just a side note. This book seems to go out of its way to include the women in the stories, more so than other books seem to. See if you take notice of this. We're going to discuss this more at the end of the book. So ladies, you especially, keep track of all the women, what they had to do, their activities, their roles. See what you think about this by the end of the book, and we're going to discuss this. Anyway, continuing on. So God speaks to Deborah, the prophetess, and Deborah goes to Barak and says, God has chosen you to liberate the people from the oppression, from the people of Canaan, from Jabin, the king. And Barak looks at her and says, well, okay, but I'm not super confident, and I'm not really sure I can do this, so I'll do it as long as what? As long as you go with me and kind of help keep me safe, Deborah, says the big manly man. As long as the girl goes along and helps keep me safe, I'll go. So she says, okay. She says, I will do it. Verse 8, Barak said to her, if you go with me, I will go. But if you will not go with me, I will not go. And she said, I will surely go with you. Nevertheless, on the road which you are going will not lead to your glory. For the Lord will sell Sisera, who is the general of the Canaanite army, will sell Sisera into the hand of a woman. If I, the woman, go with you, Barak, the glory is going to go to a woman, not to the man. And the implication here is Barak's not going to get the glory, but it will be Deborah, right? But that's not how it plays out. That's the picture we get when we first read through it, but that's not how it plays out at all, is it? And so they rose and they gathered up a bunch of guys and they went charging after the enemy. Sure enough, just like God said, God grants Israel success here. They chase down the enemy, they defeat them. They have all their chariots on the run, and they're pursuing them and they're attacking them. And sure enough, all the chariots get chased down, and Israel kills every last one of the soldiers, and it's a great thing, except for Sisera. He's a smart guy. He didn't become general for nothing. He says, I can see this is going to be a losing battle. I'm going to hop off my chariot and run off into the bushes and go hide somewhere else while I let the rest of my soldier dupes take the heat for this one. Sure enough, the chariots continued on. Israel caught and destroyed all the charioteers. Everybody died except for Sisera, the general. He went off and he snuck off a different way on foot. Verse 17, but Sisera fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between Jabin the king of Hazor and the house of Heber the Kenite. And Jael came outside to meet Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my lord, in here. Turn aside to me, don't be afraid. So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. Here, hide in my tent, I'll cover you up so they don't find you. And he said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I am thirsty. And she didn't bring him water. She brought him something else. She opened a skin of milk and gave him nice, warm milk to drink and covered him. You must be really sleepy, said Mama Jael. I've had babies. I know what to do. So you lay right down here under this rug. I'll cover you up nice and snugly, and I'll give you some nice, warm milk to drink, okay? I'll turn on my little lullaby machine. It'll start going do-do-do, do-do-do, like that, and you just lay right here and relax for a while in my tent. Verse 20, he said to her, stand at the opening of the tent, and if any man comes and asks you and says, is anyone here? Say, no. So verse 21, Jael, the wife of Heber, after he was sound asleep, peacefully dreaming of successes and victories down the road, Jael, the wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand. Then she went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground while he was lying fast asleep from weariness. Drove it right through his head, and as the body's twitching to the ground, tried to get itself up, is nailed to the ground, but he can't move because his temple is nailed into the dirt. And so he died. Verse 22, behold, as Barak was pursuing Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said, come, I'll show you the man whom you are seeking. So he went into her tent, and there lay Sisera dead, with a tent peg in his temple. And Barak looked at him and says, wow, you nailed it. Yes. Yes. And there he was, flat on the ground, dead. So on that day, God subdued Jabin, the king of Canaan, for the people of Israel. And the hand of the people of Israel pressed harder and harder against Canaan until they destroyed Jabin, the king of Canaan. But that's not quite the end of the story, is it? As a victory celebration, Deborah and Barak, they write a song, another song. They loved songs in those days. And so they write a victory song to celebrate the victory that they had over the leaders of Canaan. And the first part of the song talks about how they went out and they fought and they did valiantly and they chased them down and they had victory and it was super great. The kings fought against Canaan and everybody fought and it was great and we had victory. Bring us down to verse 24 of the song and see who they're singing about and who they're giving credit to for the victory. Verse 24, most blessed of women be Jael, the wife of Heber the Kenite, of tent-dwelling women, most blessed. He asked for water, and she gave him milk. She brought him curds in a noble's bowl. She sent her hand to the tent peg, and her right hand to the workman's mallet. She struck Sisera. She crushed his head. She shattered and pierced his temple. Between her feet he sank. He fell. He lay still. Between her feet he sank. He fell. Where he sank, there he fell, dead. Isn't that catchy? Aren't those good lyrics? He sank. He fell. He died. He sank. He fell. You can almost hear him dancing to the rhythm. Kind of gruesome. A little bit gruesome. And sure enough, just like Deborah said, the credit for the victory went to who? Went to a woman. Yeah. It wasn't Deborah. It was Jael who had to do the dirty work and destroy the commander of the army. But the song gets better, doesn't it? We get a little glimpse into life at that time in Israel, because the focus shifts from Jael and her victory over to, of all people, Sisera's mother. Sisera, the one who was nailed to the ground, the enemy commander. It skips to his mother and her point of view. She's still back at the Canaanite headquarters in the castle, and she's looking out the windows at the road, waiting for her son and his army to come home. And she's talking to her servant, her maid of, what do they call it, her helper lady, whoever she's called. And she's talking to her, and they have this conversation. Verse 28, out of the window she peered. The mother of Sisera wailed through the lattice, why is his chariot so long in coming? Why tarry the hoofbeats of his chariots? What's taking my boy so long? He should be coming back from the battle victorious by now. Why isn't he back yet? Verse 29, her wisest princesses answer. Indeed, she answers herself, have they not found and divided the spoil? They've taken the victory. Don't worry, Mama. They've been victorious. They're probably just taking a long time having a party out there. They're divvying up the spoils of war, and it goes on to talk about the spoils of war. Verse 30, have they not found and divided the spoils? A womb or two for every man. Spoil of dyed materials for Sisera. Spoil of dyed materials embroidered. 2 pieces of dyed work embroidered for the neck as spoil. They're out there dividing up the possessions of the people they've conquered and killed. So you go and you kill the people that take the stuff. That's how war works. And so what kind of spoils did they find to divide up among themselves? Well, here's a nice garment. Here's a cute handkerchief. Here's a nice scarf. And the ESV says a womb or 2 for every man. I think NIV and KJV, I forget which is which. One says a woman or 2 for every man. Another says a girl or 2 for every man. They're dividing up the spoils. Here's a handkerchief for you. Here's a coat for you. Here's a suit for you. What's left? These poor people don't have much. I know what they have. Here's a bunch of girls. We can divide those up among ourselves and have some fun too. We've fought hard. We deserve some fun. So here, you take a couple girls and go have some fun. You take a couple girls, go have some fun. There's 1 or 2 for each of us. Let's go have some fun before we slice them all and go home. And it's interesting, like I said, girls, woman. ESV actually goes into it and dehumanizes it a little bit more, which is probably even more accurate. A womb or 2. Here's a womb for you. Go have fun. Here's a womb for you. Go have fun. Ladies, how would you like to live at this time? Kind of a grisly story, isn't it? How would you like to live in the time of the judges? What do you think? A little bit even worse than Ehud, wasn't it? Which is even a little bit worse than Othniel. I wish I could say this is the end of the book. It is not. We'll have to continue later. Next week, by the way, I will not be here. We're going to go visit our daughter in Iowa. So you'll have somebody else up here. So you're going to have to remember all this, lock it in your long-term memories for 2 weeks. 2 weeks, and then we will come back to it, okay? Whether you want to or not, we will come back to it. Let's pray. Dear God, we thank you this morning for the things we can learn here. We don't really like this book. It's super uncomfortable, it's sad, it's rebellious, it's defeating, and we see so much of ourselves in this book as well. We look at our own country and what's happened here, and we complain about the decline of our own nation and how we've gone downhill since our founding and how we've turned away from you, and that's all true. But that's not unique to us, of course. That's universal human nature, and even your own people did the same thing. That doesn't make it any better, but it's hard for us to read this because we can see pictures of ourselves here as well. Help us to learn from their mistakes and not do the same thing. And we'll learn more from this book later too. In Jesus' name I pray, amen. All right, we will continue. If you're reading ahead or reading along, please continue and finish this book, and we'll finish it up in 2 weeks. You're dismissed.